The sand in the eastern desert does not just drift, it covers. If you walk the old caravan tracks from the edge of the Sahel to the Mediterranean today, you are walking on a floor of dust that was once alive. But there are no markers. There are no monuments built from stone to tell you who fell there. The silence of the landscape is absolute, and that silence is not an accident of geography. It is the result of a calculation. Imagine a system that ran day and night without a pause for 1,300 years. A system that moved 14 million human beings across oceans of sand and water, using their muscles, their blood, and their bodies to power empires from Baghdad to Istanbul. In the Atlantic trade, the evidence of the past is visible. It walks the streets of New York, Rio de Janeiro, and Kingston. There are 45 million descendants who carry the names, the history, and the survival of their ancestors in the open air. But if you walk through Cairo, Baghdad, or Riyadh today, the crowds look different. The millions who were dragged north and east across the centuries seem to have left no trace. They do not have neighborhoods. They do not have separate festivals. They do not have a distinct culture that you can point to and say, this belongs to the children of the African trade. Where did they go? How do you lose 14 million people? The answer is not a mystery of science. It is the story of a machine. It was a social and legal mechanism built on purpose, tuned over generations, designed to swallow not just the labor of a person but their very existence. It was a process of erasure so complete that it worked at the level of the name, the culture, and the chromosome. What you are about to look at is how that machine was built, how it ran, and how it left behind an entire continent of ghosts. The air still smells of what was breathing at dawn. Smoke from burning thatch pushes hard into her eyes, but she can still see through the haze. She can see her father slumped near the cattle pen. His body is completely still. One arm is bent the wrong way. The world she knew 3 hours ago is completely gone. A language she has never tasted before snaps over her head. It is harsh, clipped, and fast. The words mean nothing to her, but the iron behind them is unmistakable. The rope at her wrist is stiff and rough. Someone else sweated into it yesterday. She can feel the old grime scratching against her raw skin. She is only 15 years old. She had a name this morning, a name her mother shouted when the sun came up over the trees. By sundown, that name will be nothing but ash, the same as the walls of her village. This is not the start of a long journey? No. This is the last hour of her world. That girl is now reduced to a small circle of black ground and a length of dirty rope. She is no longer a daughter. She is no longer a sister. She is now one single entry in a ledger that will stretch for 13 centuries. Think about that number. 14 million human beings dragged from the green lands of sub-Saharan Africa into the Ottoman Empire and the wider Arab world. It is a figure so massive that it is hard to hold in the mind. How do you grasp the weight of 14 million separate heartbreaks? The trade began long before the first Atlantic ships were ever built in Europe. And it kept moving long after those Atlantic ships stopped. But here is the question that should keep you awake at night. The Atlantic trade left 45 million descendants across the Americas. They are living proof that people survived. They married, they raised children, they remembered who they were. So where are the descendants of this older, longer trade? Where are the tens of millions of voices who should be walking the streets of Cairo, Baghdad, Istanbul, and Riyadh today? The silence is the answer. This was never a story of survival. This was a story of erasure, carried out with absolute patience. What happened to this girl was not an accident. It was not a side effect of an economy. It was a machine, built on purpose, tuned over centuries, designed to swallow not only human labor but human bloodlines. The journey began the moment her life ended. For millions like her, the first proving ground was the Great Sahara. A furnace of red sand and wind that culled the weak long before the slave markets ever opened their gates. This was not a road. It was a filter written into the geography of the earth itself. Columns of hundreds of captives were driven north under armed guard. They were tied neck to neck on a single rope. A moving chain of human bodies that stretched from the grass plains of the Sahel all the way to the distant shore of the Mediterranean. If you stumbled, if your knees gave out in the heat, you were not helped up. The knife took care of the rope and the column kept moving. The desert did not look back. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe and share to support the channel. Water was never a kindness in the deep desert. It was a tool. It was rationed with clinical precision. Not to keep people healthy, not to make their suffering less, but simply to keep the cargo arriving at the destination. Anyone who broke down under the heat was cut loose with a swift stroke of a knife. Their body stayed exactly where it dropped, half curled in the burning sand. Within minutes, the vultures and the jackals would descend. Later caravans did not get lost in the wasteland. They used those very bones as signposts. Think about the horror of walking a path where the markers are the skeletons of children. A British explorer named James Richardson walked one of these exact tracks in the year 1845. He traveled the route through Gadams and Fezon. What he saw stayed with him for the rest of his days. He wrote in his journal that the trail was literally paved with human bones. There were so many that travelers no longer even bothered to count them. He described the small, fragile bones of children, polished pure white by the sun and the desert wind, lying right beside the larger bones of the women who had tried to carry them. He counted the corpses for just one single day of marching. The number climbed past 100 before the noon sun was even high in the sky. Another traveler, a German explorer named Gustav Nachtigall, crossed the same desert decades later. He described columns where the dead were not even buried. Why? Because the slavers did not want to waste time digging graves. They simply unhitched the dead body from the chain and left it sitting upright against a rock, as if the person were merely resting. The passing column just kept walking. None of this was a breakdown of the system. It was the design. The merchants knew their mathematics down to the last decimal point. A fixed percentage of the human cargo was expected to die before reaching the markets of Cairo or Tripoli. That loss was already calculated into the profit margins. The desert took the sick, the old, the slow, the pregnant. What walked out on the other side of the sand had passed the first major inspection without the merchants ever lifting a single finger. It was quality control, performed entirely by thirst and heat. The exact same economic equation ran across the salt water of the ocean. From the Swahili coast, human beings were stacked into the dark bellies of wooden dhows. They were bound for Zanzibar, for Oman, for the slave markets of Persia. Those cargo holds were never designed for people. People were forced to fit into them. Bodies were pressed against bodies in spaces so low that an adult could not even sit upright. They spent weeks lying in their own waste. Air came only in thin, hot gusts through the tiny cracks between the wooden planks. Food was nothing but a fistful of dates. Water turned green and rotten in the barrels by the very third day. Dysentery, scurvy, and smallpox moved through the hull in a matter of hours. A British naval officer named Captain Columb boarded some of these captured ships in the 1860s. What he found was staggering. Children were stacked in tiers, like loaves of bread on a baker's shelf. Living bodies were still chained tightly to the dead. The sharks learned to follow these ships so closely that the crew could throw a corpse over the rail without even slowing down the sail. When a captive died, the body went into the sea without a single word. It was cheaper than medicine. It was cheaper than time. If a ship arrived with only half its human cargo still breathing, it was still logged as a highly successful voyage. The survivors had endured the ultimate test of survival. And that survival only raised their price on the auction block. The destination for those who survived the sea was a place like Zanzibar. By the middle of the 19th century, this small island had become a human processing plant disguised as a beautiful port town. The architecture itself worked to break the mind. The slave market stood right at the very heart of Stone Town, right in the shadow of the Sultan's palace. Captives were funneled straight into dark holding pens beneath the buildings. These were underground cells cut directly into the rough coral rock. The ceilings were so low that a grown adult could not even stand up straight. They sat in those suffocating chambers for days, sometimes weeks, waiting. They were sorted by age, by sex, by their origin. Then they were fed just enough to round out their thin faces. Their raw skin was rubbed with palm oil to hide the deep sores and the rope burns. They were being staged like furniture before a showroom opens to the public. When the auction began, the air carried the sweet smell of cloves mixed with the stench of human sweat and the salt wind off the harbor. There was no loud shouting, no visible hatred. It was just commerce, performed with an absolute administrative calm. That calm was the most terrifying part of it all. The final step in turning a person into a mere product happened on the raised platform. It was a clinical, invasive inspection designed to strip away the very last shred of human dignity. A buyer would step up to a woman on the stand. He would force her mouth open with his fingers, running them along her teeth and gums to estimate her true age. He would pinch the flesh of her arms and her calves to check the muscle tone. He would order her to walk, to turn, to lift her limbs. If there were scars on her back, her price instantly dropped. Why? Because a scarred back suggested a spirit that had fought back before. It meant she was dangerous. The woman was stripped completely naked in the open air. Dozens of eyes moved over her bare skin looking for blemishes, looking for anything that would reduce her value as a laborer or as a concubine. The most private parts of a young girl's body became nothing more than a line item in a businessman's ledger. On that platform, in that single minute, a human being stopped existing. What stood there now was a list of physical attributes. Age read from teeth, health read from flesh, compliance estimated from the smoothness of her skin. The men who ran these markets were not wild brutes. They were sophisticated operators. They kept careful records in Arabic script. They tracked profit and loss per head. They understood the monsoon seasons, the exchange rates, the value of silver coins minted in faraway Vienna. The path of that young girl ran through a massive economic logic shared across half the known world. Her youth, her health, her face, each one was just a variable. Each one was a number. She was an asset. And the journey she had survived was a long process of asset management, tuned to maximize the return on investment for the master who claimed her. When the price was finally agreed, silver moved from one hand to another. The girl was pulled off the stand, fresh iron chains snapped onto her wrists. She was led away from the noise of the square, through narrow alleys that smelled of smoke and cardamom, past high walls of coral stone. The heavy wooden door of her master's house swung inward on dry hinges. It closed behind her with a deep, heavy thud, a sound like a stone being rolled across a dark tomb. She did not yet understand what kind of place she had entered. A place where the only way to keep breathing was to let everything she ever was be ground down to absolute nothing. The imperial harem of the Ottomans was the final destination for the most expensive women shipped north through the great networks of Cairo and Istanbul. But it was not a palace of romance. That image was painted much later by European artists who had never even stepped through the gates. The truth on the other side of that heavy door was a cage. It was a sealed vault, a political snake pit, and a slow, silent machine for taking a human being completely apart and reassembling her into an instrument of the state. The walls of the palace glowed with beautiful blue and red tiles. The floors were buried under carpets so thick they swallowed the sound of every footstep. But for the hundreds of women living inside, those beautiful walls were the absolute limit of the world. Once a woman passed through the main gate, she would never pass back out. This was her entire geography for the rest of her life. The total destruction of her identity began on the very first day. The name her mother had given her, the syllables her family had used to call her in from the fields when the sun went down, was taken from her instantly. It was discarded like a piece of worthless trash. In its place, the chief stewardess of the harem assigned her a new name, written into the palace registers with a reed pen dipped in dark ink. The new names were chosen for how sweet they sounded on the master's tongue. Pomegranate flower, tulip garden, daffodil, the joyful one. This new name was not just paperwork, it was a formal declaration of ownership. The old name belonged to a girl whose existence was now officially closed forever. Her native language went next. The tongue she had learned as a small child, the language of her grandmother's bedtime stories, was strictly forbidden inside those stone walls. Speaking it drew a brutal beating from the eunuch overseers, delivered with a thin rod of wood across the bare soles of her feet. She had to learn Ottoman Turkish, the language of her masters, and she had to learn it fast enough to obey complex orders without a single moment of hesitation. Older women in the dormitories drilled the new arrivals in the first essential phrases. "Yes, mistress. At once. Forgive me. Then came her religion. She was pushed, by force or by the slower, crushing pressure of social exclusion, to completely give up her faith and convert to Islam. To refuse was to remain a permanent outsider with no path to anything except scrubbing cold stone floors until she died of sheer exhaustion. In a matter of weeks, the three pillars of who she had been, her name, her tongue, her God, were knocked out from under her. She was being unmade on purpose. She was turned into a completely blank surface, prepared so that the imperial will of the Sultan could be written on her without any interference. This new world ran on a terrifying, strict pyramid of power. At the very top sat the mother of the reigning Sultan. Below her sat the Sultan's official wives, then the favored concubines, and at the very bottom, a silent ocean of domestic servants who would never even meet the Sultan in their entire lives. This is where the captured girl entered the system, servant to the servants. She carried massive copper jugs of water that left deep bruises on her hips. She emptied chamber pots at dawn. She laundered heavy linen in freezing water that cracked her knuckles open. Friendships in this place were incredibly dangerous. Alliances were short and transactional. The only direction that mattered was up, and the only ladder upward ran straight through the Sultan's bedchamber. A woman's womb was the single path to power inside the palace, and that exact same womb was the instrument by which her entire ancestry would be permanently deleted. The most coveted prize in this gilded cage was pregnancy by the master, and the highest version of that prize was a son. A concubine who delivered a male child was instantly promoted to a special legal status. She could no longer be sold like property. Her daily allowance of silver increased. She was given her own private apartments, her own servants, her own authority. She was no longer just an anonymous face in the dark dormitory. She was now the mother of a prince. But that promotion turned the harem into a silent, deadly battlefield. Women trained for years in skills meant to catch a single glance from the master. They memorized classic poetry. They mastered traditional musical instruments. They studied complex dances passed down through generations. They were trained the way racehorses are trained, for a single race that most of them would never even run. The competition did not stop at music and verse. It bled into brutal politics, faction wars, and deadly poison. A pregnant rival was a marked woman. Women spied on each other through the cracks in the doors. They whispered to the laundresses and the cooks in the kitchens. A single dose of powdered herbs slipped into a sweet drink could force a miscarriage in the middle of the night. Enslaved girls had to taste every plate of food first, and some of them died agonizing deaths on the kitchen floor just to protect a favored mistress from being poisoned. Even the children themselves were never truly safe. A cruel imperial law allowed a new sultan to execute all of his brothers the moment he took the throne, to prevent civil wars. In the year 1595, one sultan ordered 19 of his half-brothers to be strangled in a single afternoon. They were killed with a silk cord by executioners who did not utter a single word. The boys, some of them only infants, were buried in small wooden coffins while their mothers watched in absolute horror. Those mothers had spent decades climbing the ruthless palace pyramid, only to watch their sons walk straight into the hands of the executioners. And yet, even winning this terrifying game was a form of total defeat. Picture our captured girl. She survives the brutal dormitory years. She masters the language, she catches the master's eye. She becomes pregnant and delivers a healthy son. She has reached the absolute highest rung of the ladder. Her son is now a prince of the empire. But that victory completes her erasure. Her son will never be raised to know her homeland. He will never learn a single word of her native language. He will never hear the stories her own mother told her by the village fire. He will be taken away and raised by scholars and tutors chosen by the state. He will be taught theology, statecraft, and military strategy. He will study the long history of his father's ancestors back to the very founders of the dynasty. He will learn the names of kings and conquerors, but he will never learn the true name of his African grandmother. His entire identity will be assembled from his father's world. He will look at his mother and see a beloved figure from his childhood, but he will not see her history. Her bloodline will pour into the massive imperial river, and that river will carry absolutely no trace of where her specific drop originated. She will never found a lineage of her own. She was merely the biological vessel through which her master's lineage continued for one more generation. The harem was only the inner chamber of this massive machine. Outside its walls, a second parallel mechanism was running across small households, merchants' compounds, and fields from Cairo to Baghdad. For the millions of captives who would never see a palace or an auction block in Istanbul, a different fate had been prepared. It was a fate written into law books and domestic customs. And it left no descendants at all. We arrive at the central riddle of this 13th-century-long trade. 14 million people were moved across deserts and oceans. Yet today their demographic footprint is almost completely invisible. There is no large, distinct population walking the streets of Istanbul or Cairo that preserves a memory of this diaspora. There are no separate neighborhoods with their own schools, music scenes, or political representatives. How do you lose 14 million people so completely? The answer lies in the three interlocking pillars of the machine. The first pillar was a direct, physical attack on the future of the African man. While women were brought north for domestic labor and the production of heirs, a massive share of captured boys, taken between the ages of 7 and 12, were assigned to be made into eunuchs. Castration was a core feature of the trade, priced into the markets to supply guards for harems and noble households. The procedure was carried out at specific staging points along the routes, like the Coptic monastery at Abu Jurj in Upper Egypt, or the town of Bagirmi near Lake Chad. The operations were brutal, performed with razors honed on leather strips. The wounds were cauterized with boiling oil or closed by burying the boys up to their waists in hot desert sand for days. The screams could be heard half a mile away on still nights. The mortality rate was catastrophic. Out of every 10 boys subjected to the procedure, only 1 or 2 survived the horrific infections that followed. The rest were dropped into shallow trenches, their names unrecorded, their families never learning their fate. But the survivors were worth their weight in gold, fetching up to 10 times the price of an intact male slave. Every castration was a genetic full stop. A closed line on a ledger that would never reopen. The male line was severed at the source. The second pillar was the legal absorption of the children born to enslaved women. Across the Islamic world, if an enslaved woman bore a child by her free master, the child was born free and belonged fully to the father's lineage. On the surface this looks humane, but demographically it was a rapid mechanism of erasure. The American system preserved a community by walling it off through segregation. This system dissolved a community by absorbing it. The freeborn child was given an Arabic or Turkish name, raised speaking the dominant language, and instructed in Islam from birth. The African mother was granted no legal standing as a transmitter of ancestry. She could not pass down her language or her stories without inviting punishment from the senior women of the house. Within a single generation, the African half of the child's identity was reduced to a biological fact completely stripped of cultural meaning. This led to the third pillar, the total dilution of bloodlines. Because there was no rigid racial caste system like the one-drop rule of the West, the descendants of these unions married directly into the general population. The son of a concubine married a Turkish, Arab, or Bosnian woman. His children were 1/4 African. By the third or fourth generation, the recognizable physical features were entirely gone, blended into the population stretching from the Atlas Mountains to the Persian Gulf. The memory vanished from the page. Millions entered the machine, but almost no recognizable community emerged on the other side. There is no Afro-Turkish music scene rivaling the blues or jazz. There is no Afro-Arab literary movement standing beside the literature of the diaspora in the Americas. There are no great monuments or annual days of remembrance. The chains eventually rusted away, the dhows rotted on the beaches, and the auction blocks were paved over with stone. The real horror of this history is not found in a single spectacular moment of violence. It is found in the patient, methodical, and successful deletion of millions of human lives from the memory of the world, leaving behind nothing but an empty space on the map, a silence in the records, and a ghost made entirely out of arithmetic. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.